40 years of putting your family first, sacrificing every personal desire on the altar of domestic stability, and the very first time you decide to do something entirely for yourself, they categorize it as a structural emergency. My name is Garrick Vance. I am 68 years old, and I live on the west side of Naperville, Illinois, off Hobson Road, in a highly affluent, quiet suburban neighborhood called Stillwater. I have lived on the exact same tree-lined street for 22 years, same brick house, same manicured yard, same disciplined man. Before my recent retirement, I spent 34 rigorous years working in heavy industrial supply chain management, ultimately retiring as the director of global procurement for an international logistics conglomerate. For over 3 decades, my entire life was defined by the relentless physics of cost optimization, line item tracking, and cold, unyielding bottom-line negotiation. I got up before the sun 6 days a week, traveling across the country to secure raw material contracts, yet I drove a completely sensible, unpretentious car to work every day. My wife Martha will tell you that I wore the exact same pair of scuffed, resoled Red Wing leather work boots for 12 consecutive years. I did it intentionally, refusing to spend a single unnecessary dollar on my own wardrobe while our 2 children, Preston and Brooke, were navigating expensive private academies and preparing for college. What the children never realized, because they lacked the analytical foresight to look beneath the surface of our quiet suburban lifestyle, was that every corporate bonus check, every maximized stock option, and every single dollar I saved by living far below my financial means didn't vanish into thin air. It went directly into an aggressive, ironclad personal brokerage account that I managed with the clinical precision of an industrial audit. I didn't flash my net worth. I didn't belong to the ostentatious country club circuits, and I didn't wear luxury timepieces. Instead, I quietly maxed out my diverse investment portfolios for 30 consecutive years, masking a massive multi-million-dollar financial empire under the strategic guise of ordinary middle-class suburban budgeting. That is precisely who Garrick Vance was, and who I still am. My 68th birthday arrived on a humid Thursday in late June. Martha spent the afternoon in the kitchen preparing my favorite meal, a perfectly grilled ribeye steak, loaded mashed potatoes, roasted seasonal vegetables, and her legendary lemon icebox pie, an upscale dessert she only takes the time to make twice a year. Preston and Brooke both called me that evening. They were perfectly nice calls, exceptionally short calls, the exact brand of performative family check-ins that feel warm on the surface until you look at the digital call log and realize they lasted exactly 4 minutes combined. But I told myself that was perfectly fine. They are busy corporate professionals building their own high-stress careers in the Chicago Loop. I chose to understand. What neither of my children knew, what absolutely nobody in my immediate circle knew, was that exactly 3 days prior to my birthday dinner, I had quietly walked into the showroom at Naperville Auto House on Route 59. I spent less than 20 minutes reviewing the inventory before signing the final execution papers on a brand new 2024 BMW 7 Series sedan. I ordered it in mineral white with a pristine, grain-matched black leather interior. Every single premium option and technological feature of that specific luxury model line was included, a vehicle architecture I had obsessively studied on their corporate website for 6 long years, without ever permitting myself to click the Request a Local Quote button. The final invoice came out to exactly $85,000. I didn't finance a single dime. I didn't request a payment plan. I simply wrote a single check from my private liquid capital account and paid the full balance in cold, unyielding cash. Welcome back to Dad's Ultimate Payback. Get your posture right and settle in, because this narrative is about to expose the raw, unfiltered mathematics of modern suburban entitlement. Do me a critical favor right now. Hit that like button, drop a detailed comment below letting me know exactly where you are listening from, and make sure you are fully subscribed to the channel. Trust me, you want to be completely locked into this ledger to see exactly how a global procurement director runs a definitive audit on his own bloodline. I drove that immaculate machine home under the fading June sun, pulled into the concrete driveway on Hobson Road, and turned off the engine. I sat there in the absolute dark of the cabin for exactly 11 uninterrupted minutes before I even attempted to go inside the house. I just sat there in the stillness, running my hands slowly across the hand-stitched leather steering wheel. observing the perfect alignment of the seams on the seats, and listening to the profound, clinical quiet of the insulated cabin. For the first time in longer than I can legally name, I felt like an absolute man. I don't use that phrase lightly. I am stating that I felt, for the absolute first time in my adult life, like I had finally done something exclusively for Garrick. It wasn't a transaction for the maintenance of the household. It wasn't a deposit for the kids' elite college funds. It wasn't a transfer for an emergency roof replacement. And it wasn't the premium payment for Brooke's high-risk car insurance that I had been silently covering from my own account since she turned 17 years old. It was entirely for me. I had finally completed a procurement contract where I was the sole beneficiary. I should have known, based on every law of structural integrity, that the feeling of unburdened success wouldn't be permitted to last long in this family. The initial structural fracture occurred on a bright Saturday morning, exactly 4 days after my birthday celebration. Brooke came by the house completely unexpected, pulling her compact vehicle into the driveway without calling ahead, which is her standard, unceremonious way of handling visits. I heard the sound of her brakes, looked out through the double-paned kitchen window, and saw her sitting behind her steering wheel, completely frozen. She was staring blankly at the mineral-white BMW parked on the asphalt, as if the luxury vehicle had personally insulted her social standing. I caught myself smiling, picked up my ceramic coffee mug, and walked out onto the front porch to greet her. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, leaning casually against the cedar railing. Brooke stepped out of her car slowly, her eyes tracking the chrome lines of the sedan, like a forensic detective, assessing a highly violent crime scene. "Dad," she paused, her voice instantly dropping into a sharp, accusatory register. "What exactly is that?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "That is a 2024 BMW 7 Series, baby girl. Beautiful piece of engineering, isn't it?" She turned her head toward me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You bought that?" she asked flatly. "I did. Last Tuesday, a little birthday gift to myself." She walked a tight circle around the vehicle, her fingers trailing near the paint, but never touching it, her entire posture radiating an intense, defensive hostility. "Dad, this car is—" She stopped herself, aggressively pressing her palm against her forehead, as if navigating a severe medical migraine. "How much was this exactly?" I kept my expression entirely room temperature. "85,000, I replied calmly. The sound that tore out of her throat wasn't a gasp, and it wasn't a coherent word. It was a strange, suffocating hiss of pure, unadulterated economic panic. She didn't even bother to step inside the house to say hello to her mother. She spun on her designer heel, marched straight back to her vehicle, and pulled out her smartphone before she had even closed her car door. I stood on my porch, drinking my coffee, and watched her speed away down the Stillwater corridor. I watched her actively dialing a number before she even reached the intersection at the end of Hobson Road. I didn't need a wiretap to know exactly who was on the other end of that line. She was launching a strategic advisory call to her brother Preston, treating my personal automotive milestone not as a father's well-earned reward, but as a direct, aggressive theft from their anticipated inheritance. The corporate sibling alliance had officially been triggered, and they were already drawing up the agenda for an ambush. Preston and Brooke materialized on our doorstep the very next morning, arriving completely unannounced at 9:15 a.m. In our family, when the children call ahead, it is a casual, disorganized gesture. When they arrive together without a single warning text, it indicates a pre-arranged agenda. I heard the synchronized slam of their car doors on the concrete, looked out the front window, and watched them march up the walkway side by side, their faces tight with a clinical, corporate-style determination. Martha was in the kitchen pouring a fresh pot of coffee, her movements freezing as the heavy brass knocker rattled against the front door. We exchanged a long, silent look across the hallway. Her eyes carried a gentle, pleading warning that said, "Just be patient with them," while my expression returned a cold, absolute acknowledgement. I know exactly what kind of negotiation this is going to be. I opened the door, and they strode past me into the living room without offering a single genuine embrace or holiday greeting. Preston took his position on the center of the leather sofa, adjusting his tailored blazer with a practiced administrative stiffness, while Brooke claimed the armchair nearest the window, the exact same seat she had occupied since she was 9 years old. I settled into the armchair directly across from them, maintaining a completely neutral, room-temperature posture. The air in the room was dense and suffocating, carrying the distinct artificial tension of a hostile corporate board meeting. But they didn't just show up to voice simple, spoken complaints. Preston reached into his upscale leather briefcase and produced several neatly stapled packets of paper, sliding them aggressively across the oak coffee table toward me. They had actually taken the time to print out professional, multi-page luxury automotive depreciation metrics, financial risk assessment graphs, and regional estate taxation charts. They were weaponizing data to prove to me, with clinical precision, that my private $85,000 cash purchase was an irresponsible, reckless waste of what they explicitly classified as accumulated family capital. They weren't acting as concerned children. They were acting as predatory underwriters running a corporate audit on my remaining lifespan. Preston leaned forward heavily, resting his elbows on his knees, his eyes locked onto mine with an unblinking, analytical intensity. "Dad, we need to have a serious, high-level conversation about your recent asset allocation," he began, his voice adopting the clipped, patronizing tone he uses with underperforming corporate clients. $85,000 in cold cash for a single passenger vehicle is a staggering, indefensible expenditure for a man in your demographic. You are 68 years old, Dad. You should be aggressively protecting your liquid assets and minimizing market volatility, not engaging in this kind of extreme, volatile spending. I reached down, took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, and set the ceramic mug back onto the wood without making a sound. "I saved specifically for that vehicle for 6 uninterrupted years, Preston," I replied evenly. "The invoice was cleared using my own private discretionary funds. It doesn't alter the household operating budget by a single percentage point." Preston dropped his head slightly, letting out a sharp, mocking sigh, before looking back up to deliver the devastating, prearranged phrase, "Dad, the reality is that you are simply living too large right now, and you know it. You need to immediately cut back your lifestyle metrics." The sheer audacity of the statement caused the room to go entirely still. Martha appeared in the living room doorway, her face pale, her jaw tightening as the words hung in the air. "Preston, please." She stepped forward, her voice carrying a rare, protective edge. "Your father has worked under immense stress for 34 years to build this life. He wore the same boots for over a decade, so you two could graduate debt-free. If anyone has earned the right to..." Preston didn't let her finish. He spun around in his seat, raising a sharp, dismissive hand directly toward his own mother, cutting her off mid-sentence with absolute, cold arrogance. "Mom, stop. We are trying to run a critical financial intervention here. Just let the professionals talk." Martha flinched, her lips pressing into a thin, wounded line as she looked at me. I gave her a small, imperceptible nod, my internal calculations shifting into absolute, permanent alignment. The raw depth of their entitlement had just overwritten every remaining boundary of filial respect. The room plummeted into a dead, flat silence, as the true predatory architecture of their corporate intervention finally lost its mask. Brooke leaned forward from her armchair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes narrowed with a cold, transactional hostility that completely replaced any lingering trace of childhood softness. "Let's just be completely honest for once, Dad," she snapped, her voice dropping into a sharp, bitter register that echoed off the crown molding. "If you keep spending liquid capital at this volume, you are going to leave us with absolutely nothing. You are actively depleting the generational equity that is supposed to secure the future of this family." I sat perfectly still across from her, letting the word "us" breathe in the quiet room. I let it hang in the air until the full, ugly weight of their entitlement was completely exposed. They weren't worried about my health, they weren't worried about my retirement comfort, and they certainly weren't worried about macroeconomic depreciation. They were terrified that the living, breathing bank account sitting in front of them was spending their unearned inheritance before they had the chance to claim it. Martha remained frozen in the doorway, her eyes filling with wet, silent tears, as she realized the profound moral bankruptcy of the children she had raised. She looked at me, her face silently begging me not to let the morning devolve into a shouting match. But as a senior procurement director, I knew that getting loud is the defense mechanism of an amateur. A true professional gets organized. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dispute their depreciation charts, and I didn't offer a single word of defense for my 40 years of sacrifice. Instead, I looked at both of my children, nodded my head with slow, systematic compliance, and allowed my expression to go completely blank. "You both make an exceptionally compelling financial point," I said, my tone perfectly matching the cold, room temperature of the documents on the table. "You're absolutely right. I need to be significantly more careful with my outgoing funds. I hear you loud and clear, and I will begin cutting back immediately." Preston and Brooke exchanged a quick, triumphant look of profound relief, completely satisfied that they had successfully intimidated their aging father into submission. They thought they had just won a corporate victory over my bank account. They had absolutely no idea that by demanding I cut back the family expenses, they had just hand-delivered the exact mandate I needed to permanently disconnect their entire lives from my wealth. The structural load had shifted, the parameters were locked, and the trap was officially set. Late that night, long after Martha had fallen into a restless sleep, I retreated to my private back office off the main hallway, the small, locked room the children always resentfully referred to as Dad's fortress, because no one else was permitted to alter its filing systems. I sat down at my heavy oak desk, flipped open my laptop, and initiated a comprehensive audit of our primary financial ledgers. What I uncovered under the clinical glow of the screen was a staggering testament to my own blind generosity. 41 active, recurring monthly digital bills, all routing quietly from my personal corporate brokerage account straight into the lives of the two adults who had just sat on my leather sofa and accused me of financial reckless behavior. They had spent years mocking my frugality while actively draining my reserves via automatic withdrawals. I decided to begin the optimization process with the most ostentatious line item on the spreadsheet. Preston drove a metallic black 2022 Audi A5 Coupe, a razor-sharp luxury vehicle he paraded around the Chicago Loop to project an image of a high-flying, self-made corporate consultant. The monthly lease payment was exactly $724. His name was stamped on the registration. My routing number was locked into the auto-pay system. I hovered my cursor over the digital authorization tab and clicked deactivate. The corporate fallout materialized on Tuesday morning. I was sitting on the back porch on Hobson Road, enjoying the crisp morning air and reading the physical copy of the Chicago Tribune without a single digital distraction, when my phone vibrated aggressively on the cedar table. I let it ring twice, matching the rhythmic pacing of a man with zero operational anxiety, before picking up. "Dad." Preston's voice cut through the line, instantly stripped of its usual rehearsed corporate confidence and replaced with a clipped, high-pitched panic. "Did something happen with your primary bank account this week? Is there some sort of massive system glitch or a security hold on your funds?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, keeping my expression entirely flat. "Good morning to you too, Preston. Why do you ask?" Gaw exhaled sharply into the receiver. "Dad, my monthly Audi lease payment just bounced completely. I just got an automated emergency alert from Audi Financial stating that the automatic electronic fund transfer was rejected due to insufficient authorization. They've already slapped a late penalty fee onto my portal. I need you to call the bank manager right now and sort this out." I set my mug down with clinical quietness, keeping my voice exactly at room temperature. "Well, son, I suggest you look into that yourself. I am simply cutting back my lifestyle metrics. You and your sister explicitly ordered me to protect the family capital on Sunday, remember? Have a productive Tuesday." Before he could utter another syllable, I clicked the end call button, returned the phone to the table, and picked up my newspaper. The birds in the yard remained completely indifferent, and so did I. Brooke required an additional 48 hours to feel the initial weight of the desubsidization process. I always considered my daughter to be slightly sharper than Preston when it came to reading behavioral patterns, but even her modern marketing mind failed to connect the structural dots immediately. She likely assumed her brother's automotive issue was an isolated banking error, a minor technical misunderstanding that their dependable father would quietly settle behind the scenes. She discovered the reality on Thursday evening when her entire digital existence was systematically terminated. I logged into our corporate master account and deleted the premium billing profiles for her high-end luxury wellness gym membership downtown, her premium multi-screen streaming bundles including Netflix, Hulu, and HBO Max. And finally, the high-speed fiber optic home Wi-Fi plan for her upscale apartment, which had run through an automated family package I had been silently funding since she signed her very first lease. She didn't dare call my line directly. She frantically dialed Martha instead. I was standing in the dark hallway when the call came through, listening to Brooke's voice echoing loudly from the speaker screen, in a state of absolute unraveled devastation. "Mom, my entire apartment just went completely dark. My fiber optic internet stopped working mid-Zoom. My streaming accounts are throwing immediate subscription cancellation errors, and the boutique gym just sent me a formal notice stating my membership has been terminated for non-payment. Mom, what is happening? Is Dad broke? Are we being targeted by hackers?" Martha looked up from the kitchen island, her eyes catching mine standing in the shadows of the doorframe. Her face went through 3 distinct emotional transitions in a matter of seconds: immediate maternal concern for her daughter, a sudden heavy understanding of the precise economic audit I had initiated, and a fierce, careful neutrality she was trying to maintain. "Honey, just let me speak with your father," Martha said softly into the phone, her voice trembling slightly. "Just give me 24 hours to figure this out, okay?" She hung up, and the kitchen fell into a heavy silence. "George," she began, using my government name with a slow, cautious weight. "Her internet is completely gone. She works from home 2 days a week for her marketing firm." I stepped into the light, my posture completely unyielding. "Then she can call the local internet service provider tomorrow morning, navigate their automated registry, and set up her own private billing plan. Martha." "She is 26 years old." Martha pressed her lips together, her arms folding across her chest as she fought a massive internal conflict. "George, she can't easily absorb all these sudden costs on her junior salary. You know that." I looked at her calmly. "If a 26-year-old corporate professional living in an upscale district cannot independently cover a $70 Wi-Fi bill, then the problem isn't my checkbook, Martha. The problem is her entitlement, and I am officially done subsidizing it." By the second week of August, the operational constraints of the audit reached their peak. Both children's smartphones began failing them in the field. They had remained on my unlimited premium corporate family data plan since their high school days, consuming massive amounts of bandwidth without ever seeing an invoice. I chose not to completely terminate their phone lines, as that would allow them to easily migrate to an independent carrier under an emergency setup. Instead, I utilized my master administrative network clearance to log into the carrier portal and manually pause their high-speed data access, throttling their connectivity down to an agonizingly slow, archaic 2G speed bandwidth. No automated system warnings were issued, and no explanation was sent from the carrier. It was simply an instantaneous, catastrophic drop in mobile functionality. Preston attempted to call my line 4 times in a single afternoon, his digital corporate lifestyle instantly crippled by the restriction. I allowed the first 3 calls to go straight to voicemail, watching the phone vibrate on my desk with a deep, methodical satisfaction. I finally answered the 4th attempt. "Dad, what the hell is happening with the network?" he screamed into the receiver, his voice shaking with a raw, unbridled rage as he stood somewhere on a noisy downtown street. "My phone has been buffering continuously since 8 a.m. I can't load client databases, I can't pull up real-time market charts, and the second I step away from my office desk, I can't even load a basic navigation map in my car. I'm literally having to hunt for public Wi-Fi hotspots at local coffee shops like a college kid, just to send emergency emails to my accounts." I leaned back in my office chair, spinning a pen between my fingers. "Well, Preston, you should probably look into securing your own independent corporate data plan then," I replied smoothly. "My own plan? Dad, I am on your master account. I've been on this network for 10 years. I am fully aware of the timeline, son," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "But as you explicitly stated on my couch, I am living too large. You counted 41 excessive payments leaving this house, Preston. You sat in my living room and told me to my face that I was spending capital that belonged to us. So I took your professional financial advice to heart. I began running a rigorous procurement audit on my overhead, and I drastically reduced the unnecessary expenditures. It turns out a large percentage of those excessive payments were being routed directly into your pocket. A dead, heavy silence slammed through the line as the cold mathematical reality of what I had done finally penetrated his corporate ego. "You have a profitable evening, Preston," I whispered, and I disconnected the line, letting the silent house settle around the perfect execution of the blueprint. The calculated silence of my procurement audit operated in total obscurity until the middle of August, when a single structural leak accelerated the children's desperation. My nephew Dane, my brother Carl's boy, is a pleasant but fundamentally loose-lipped young man who has never possessed the internal capacity to hold water. On a humid Saturday night, Dane happened to run into Preston at a crowded, high-volume sports bar out in Lisle. After a few rounds of premium microbrews, Dane absently let slip a critical piece of family intelligence he had overheard from his father, who had previously received a stressed private phone call from Martha. "Your old man is permanently locking up the vault, Preston," Dane had offhandedly mentioned over the noise of the televisions. "My dad said Garrick is restructuring his entire multi-million-dollar empire into an ironclad, third-party legal trust." That single unchecked sentence sent my children into an immediate catastrophic tailspin. The realization struck them like a structural collapse. They suddenly understood that the sudden cancellation of the 41 monthly digital subsidies wasn't just a temporary bank glitch or a passing petulant lesson from an angry father over a luxury vehicle. Their vital financial lifeline wasn't merely frayed. The entire inheritance engine was about to be permanently legally severed from their genetic access. The behavioral data shifted instantaneously. Within 48 hours of the Lisle sports bar leak, my children's packed, high-stress corporate schedules that were previously far too congested to permit more than a combined 4-minute birthday phone call, completely cleared up. Suddenly, they possessed unlimited discretionary time for their aging parents. Preston pulled his Audi into the Hobson Road driveway early the following Sunday morning, carrying a heavy, ostentatious gift box filled with the exact brand of imported dark roast whole bean coffee he knew I preferred for my morning brew. Less than an hour later, Brooke materialized on the front porch, smiling broadly, while performatively balancing an exceptionally expensive, artisanal berry cobbler purchased from that historic boutique bakery on Washington Street downtown, an establishment I had casually mentioned admiring exactly once in my adult life. I accepted their gifts with absolute grace, offering polite, room-temperature thank yous as I escorted them into the living room. I deliberately chose to maintain a total clinical silence regarding the living trust, the canceled auto-pays, or the line-item spreadsheet. I simply sat across from them in my armchair, sipping the premium coffee, quietly watching them sweat through their deeply unnatural, intensely strained performances of sudden filial affection. Martha observed the entire frantic spectacle from the periphery, quietly serving sweet tea while moving back and forth between the kitchen counter and the living room arena. Initially, her maternal instincts had left her deeply torn. She had spent decades acting as the soft emotional shock absorber of this household, constantly pleading for gentleness whenever family friction threatened to warp the framework. But as she watched her adult children aggressively deploy these transparent, transactional gestures of devotion solely to protect their access to our capital, something fundamental broke inside her perspective. She saw the profound insincerity of the bakery cobbler and the dark roast coffee for exactly what it was, a desperate, predatory corporate salvage mission. Midway through the afternoon, while Preston was eagerly launching into a long, highly flattering story about his firm's quarterly metrics, Martha paused in the arched doorway. She completely ignored the children's gaze, locked her eyes directly onto mine from across the length of the room, and flashed a sharp, knowing, almost smile. It was the definitive silent sanction I had been waiting for. In that single, uncharacteristic look, my wife had officially stopped asking me to show them a single shred of structural mercy. The emotional cushion was gone, the engineering alignment was absolute, and the date for the final corporate audit was officially locked into the calendar. By the first week of September, the intense heat of the Illinois summer had finally broken, leaving the Stillwater neighborhood wrapped in a crisp, deceptive autumn calm. I picked this specific Sunday deliberately. Sunday means nobody has an elite corporate strategy meeting to rush to, nobody has an unresolved client call to hide behind, and nobody has a convenient excuse to cut the conversation short. It is a day where you are forced to sit, stay, and face whatever load is placed on the table. On Saturday night, I issued a brief, unadorned command via text to both Preston and Brooke. Come to the house for dinner tomorrow, 2 p.m. sharp. Do not be late. They arrived at exactly 1:58 p.m., their vehicles pulling into the Hobson Road driveway in perfect synchronization. From the front window, I watched them sit in Preston's Audi for 2 full minutes, adjusting their clothes and aligning their narratives, completely convinced that their recent weeks of performative devotion had successfully broken my resolve. Martha had prepared a massive, steaming dish of baked mostaccioli, the edges of the mozzarella cheese perfectly browned and bubbling over a heavy, savory Italian fennel sausage, the exact meal the kids used to fiercely fight over when they were small. The entire house smelled rich, warm, and comforting, projecting the flawless illusion that this was just another ordinary family Sunday from the last 22 years. Preston and Brooke sat at the dining table with a relaxed, loose confidence, eating greedily and laughing at old suburban stories. They genuinely believed this was the highly anticipated reconciliation dinner where their aging father would finally crack, apologize for the digital blackout, and hand them the keys back to the family vault. They were completely blissfully blind to the fact that while they were enjoying their first helpings, a heavy locked leather folder was sitting on my oak desk in the back office, a folder containing a devastating corporate-level forensic audit of their entire adult lives. The moment the dinner plates were cleared, the domestic atmosphere was instantly deleted. "Let's go sit in the living room," I said flatly, my voice shifting into the familiar, clinical register of a corporate procurement meeting. Preston and Brooke settled onto the leather sofa with an expectant, eager posture, while Martha claimed her usual chair near the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I walked into my private back office, unlocked the deep right drawer of my desk, and retrieved the heavy folder I had spent 6 weeks meticulously building. I walked back into the living room, sat directly across from my children, and set the dense stack of papers onto the oak coffee table with a heavy, echoing thud. I didn't open it immediately. I simply let it sit between us while I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I want to talk about the precise vocabulary you used on my couch back in June," I began softly. Preston shifted his weight, a trace of his old patronizing arrogance returning. "Dad, look, about the BMW, we didn't fully realize." "I know you didn't realize," I cut him off, my voice dropping to a freezing room temperature. "And that is actually my structural error. I never showed you the raw data. I never sat you down and made the numbers real to your faces. I am permanently correcting that omission today." I reached forward and flipped open the folder, turning the massive, multi-page spreadsheet around before sliding it aggressively across the glass toward them. "Take a look at the ledger." Preston and Brooke both leaned forward, a frown creasing Preston's forehead as he picked up the first sheet. I watched his eyes track across the columns, watched his scanning slow down to a complete crawl, and watched every ounce of color drain out of his face. Brooke read over his shoulder, her hand flying up to cover her mouth as she let out a sharp, suffocating gasp. It was a flawless, line-item historical breakdown spanning 22 continuous years. It charted every single tuition balance, every premium auto lease payment, every rent supplement, every luxury gym membership, every streaming bundle, every medical copay, every dental extraction, and every emergency credit card bailout that had quietly flowed from my private brokerage account into their pockets, like water they never had to think about because the tap was always running. Preston turned to the final index page, his fingers visibly trembling against the paper as his eyes locked onto the bottom line. "Dad," his voice came out dry, completely stripped of its corporate authority. "This grand total column says $1.2 million. I looked at both of my children, my gaze boring directly into their panicked eyes. "That data is accurate to the penny," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like an industrial blade. "You came into my house and accused me of being irresponsible. You told me I was wasting your future. So now I want you to look at that ledger and tell me, which specific part of that $1.2 million was me living too large?" A suffocating dead silence slammed into the room, the crushing, load-bearing silence of an absolute reckoning. Neither of them could offer a single syllable of defense. Numbers do not possess emotions. Numbers do not get nervous under pressure, and numbers simply sit on the glass and tell the absolute truth. I reached back into the leather folder and pulled out a secondary, shorter legal document drawn up by my corporate estate attorney 3 weeks prior. I am not here to engage in an emotional argument, and I am not here to negotiate, I stated calmly, tapping the fresh document with my pen. I am here because I have clearly done you both a profound disservice by making your adult lives too structurally comfortable to ever comprehend what comfort actually costs. I engineered a safety net so massive that it robbed you of the necessity to become functioning adults. That design flaw ends today. I unfolded the document and laid it flat over the spreadsheet. I have officially restructured my entire estate into a highly conditional revocable living trust. Your names are still on the back end of the paperwork, but the capital is completely protected behind strict, unyielding operational milestones. It will never just land in your laps. I locked my eyes onto my son. Preston, the designated corporate trustee, will not release a single dime of your trust distribution until you provide verifiable proof of steady, continuous employment at a single firm for 2 consecutive years, without receiving a single outside safety net or emergency loan. I turned my gaze to my daughter, whose eyes were already bright with rising tears. Brooke, your distribution is entirely frozen until you independently cover the full cost of your own apartment rent and utility bills for 18 consecutive months, verified by certified bank statements. Brooke's chin began to tremble, the tears finally spilling over her cheeks. Dad, please, on my current salary, I can barely afford. I am fully aware of your salary metrics, Brooke, I interrupted, my tone remaining completely level. But the answer to an unstable budget is no longer my personal checkbook. You are 26 years old, you are highly capable, and it is time for you to discover that reality on your own dime. Preston's jaw was clamped shut so tightly the muscle was twitching under his skin. And the 41 recurring payments? He asked, his voice shaking. They are permanently, irrevocably cancelled, I replied, closing the folder with a definitive snap. The subsidies are dead. You ordered me to cut back, and I have executed the order flawlessly. The illusion of family solidarity shattered into absolute, irrecoverable wreckage the exact millisecond they realized the living trust was permanent and the monthly financial pipeline was dead. The performative warmth, the dark roast coffee, and the expensive bakery cobbler from Washington Street instantly vanished, exposing the raw, ugly rot that had been hiding beneath their greed. Preston stood up from the leather sofa with a violent, erratic suddenness, his face contorted into a mask of corporate fury as he slapped his hands flat against the top of his head. "This is a total corporate ambush, Dad," he yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Do you have any actual comprehension of what my life has been like for the past 2 months? My Audi lease bounced. I got emergency warnings from the corporate dealership, and I was forced to borrow thousands of dollars from a colleague just to stabilize my own personal credit metrics because I had built my entire lifestyle around a financial safety net that you unilaterally erased without warning. You can't just treat your own children like failing employees." Brooke rose right behind him, her tears instantly drying as her posture hardened into pure, venomous resentment. She grabbed her designer purse off the table, her eyes narrowing into cold slits as she openly shrieked at me. "You are completely destroying our lives, Dad. You're sabotaging our entire corporate momentum just because we hurt your fragile feelings over a stupid luxury vehicle. We were just trying to protect our inheritance from your reckless ego, and you're punishing us for being honest." Her voice carried a sharp, piercing pitch that stripped away any remaining pretense of daughterly affection, explicitly confirming the chilling mathematical reality I had uncovered during my audit. They had never looked at me and seen a father who deserved to enjoy his retirement. They had only ever valued me as an active, automated bank account to be managed, preserved, and liquidated for their personal advancement. "We're leaving," Brooke snapped, turning her back on the living room with an icy, unyielding finality. "Preston, grab your keys. Let's go. We don't have to stay here and endure a performance review from a man who obviously owes us nothing." Preston stood frozen for one final agonizing second, looking at me with a strange, younger expression shifting behind his eyes, the panicked look of a boy who suddenly realized the safety net had been completely removed from beneath his feet. But Brooke was already marching toward the foyer, and he followed his sister out the door just as he always had. The front door didn't slam. A violent slam would have indicated an emotional outburst, a chaotic surge of temporary anger that might eventually settle. Instead, the heavy wood was pulled quietly, methodically shut into the brass frame, a chilling, deliberate, and permanent decision to sever the alignment of our family. Martha had remained entirely still in her chair near the window throughout the entire confrontation, but the moment that quiet click resonated through the house, her absolute composure collapsed. Her shoulders dropped around her ears, and she began to cry, not with dramatic, loud gasps, but with a steady, devastating flow of silent tears that came when a mother realizes the structural dam has finally failed. "George!" Her voice broke completely on my name, the single syllable catching in her throat. "Our babies. They just walked out on us." I immediately stood up, crossed the living room floor, and wrapped both of my arms tightly around her trembling frame. She buried her face deep into my shoulder, her fingers gripping the fabric of my shirt, as if reaching for the only solid foundation left in the room. We stood there together in the center of the quiet space, listening to the muffled, distant roar of Preston's Audi, accelerating hard down Hobson Road, until the sound completely faded into the autumn air. "They are going to be perfectly okay, Martha," I whispered gently into her graying hair, my voice carrying the absolute certainty of a master builder. "They will finally learn how to stand on their own 2 feet and become actual, functioning adults now that the crutches have been permanently removed. This isn't cruelty. It's the only way to save their structure." An hour later, the house had settled into a profound, beautiful, and deeply necessary quiet. I walked Martha into the kitchen, sat her down at the island, and poured her a fresh cup of hot tea before sitting down directly across from her. The house still carried the rich, lingering aroma of the baked mostaccioli and that untouched berry cobbler sitting on the counter, but the emotional load had been entirely cleared from the property. I looked out through the double-paned glass window, my eyes tracking across the driveway where the mineral-white BMW 7 Series sat gleaming under the early evening suburban shadows. A deep, unshakable serenity washed over my chest, the exact feeling of absolute operational balance. I realized then that I had spent 40 uninterrupted years putting every single person in that family ahead of my own desires. I had worked under intense logistics stress, worn the same scuffed Red Wing boots for 12 years, lived far below my economic means, and silently managed 41 separate subsidies just to ensure my children had a soft landing at every stage of their lives. And the moment I spent a fraction of my own cash on a personal reward, they called it a problem. I leaned back into my chair, watching Martha take a slow, peaceful sip of her tea, as her breathing finally stabilized. The ledger was officially closed, the calculation was accurate, and the parameters of my retirement were completely locked. I was going to spend the remaining years of my life driving that white car down Route 59, enjoying the absolute quiet of the insulated cabin, and I had zero intention of apologizing to a single soul about it. For 40 years, I was their bank. For the rest of my days, I was simply George Bates, a self-made man who engineered his own freedom. If you found this definitive audit of suburban entitlement and family justice deeply satisfying, do us a major favor before you exit the ledger. Smash that like button right now. Drop a detailed comment below letting me know exactly what city or state you are watching from, and make absolutely certain you are fully subscribed to Dad's Ultimate Payback. We have an entire system of cold, calculated, and intensely rewarding narratives waiting for you in the archives. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next line item.